Millionaire catches housekeeper, teaching his autistic son to play piano. The ending is incredible. Anthony Wilson watched through the half-open door, incredulous at the scene unfolding in his music room. In his 65 years of life, few things had surprised him as much as seeing his son Lucas sitting at the piano, focused on the instructions that Regina, the housekeeper, was patiently whispering. Anthony Wilson had returned early from a last-minute cancelled meeting, only to find the employee invading a space in the house that was beyond her work boundaries. Anthony felt his blood boil as he saw Regina, with her hands calloused from work, guiding Lucas's delicate fingers over the keys of the extremely expensive grand piano imported from Germany. "What do you think you're doing?" Anthony's deep voice echoed through the room, making Regina jump with fright while Lucas remained motionless, his fingers still resting on the keys. "Mr. Wilson, I can explain." Regina quickly stood up from the piano bench, nervously straightening her light blue uniform. "There's nothing to explain, you're fired." The words came out sharp and definitive. "Collect your things and leave my house immediately." Regina's face turned pale, but she maintained her dignity, nodding silently. When she made a motion to touch Lucas's shoulder to say goodbye, Anthony stepped forward. "Don't touch my son. It's enough that you took advantage of the situation to invade a private space in the house." Regina stepped back, swallowing hard. Her dark eyes, normally serene, now shimmered with held-back tears. Anthony noticed with growing irritation that she seemed more concerned about Lucas than about her own dismissal. "Excuse me, sir." She walked toward the door, head held high despite the humiliation. That's when something happened that Anthony had never witnessed before. Lucas, who rarely showed any emotional reaction, began rocking back and forth, emitting a guttural moan that soon transformed into a high-pitched scream. The 8-year-old boy slammed his hands against the piano, producing a frightening cacophony. "Lucas!" Anthony ran to his son, trying to contain him, but the physical contact only made the situation worse. Lucas threw himself on the floor, his body rigid, eyes fixed on the ceiling as he screamed deafeningly, "Let me help, please." Regina had returned, upon hearing the scream, and now stood at the door, her face contorted with concern. "Stay away. You've caused enough problems," Anthony shouted over his son's screams while trying unsuccessfully to calm him. The crisis lasted almost an hour. Not even the presence of Marlene, the specialized nurse who cared for Lucas, could completely calm him. When the boy finally quieted down, exhausted, Anthony carried him to his room and put him to bed. Marlene administered the medication prescribed for crisis situations, and Lucas fell into a deep sleep. When he returned to the music room, Anthony found Regina waiting in the hallway, still wearing her uniform. Noticing his presence, she immediately began to speak. "Mr. Wilson, I know you're furious, and you have every right to be, but I need..." To explain what happened, Lucas came into the room when I was cleaning the piano. He seemed fascinated by the instrument, touched a few keys, and he smiled, sir. He genuinely smiled. You know how rare that is. Anthony hesitated. He did know. In the past 3 years, since the diagnosis of severe autism, Lucas's smiles were as rare as snowy days in July. "What do you know about this? You're not a therapist, you're not a doctor, you're just the housekeeper." The words sounded harsher than he intended, but Anthony didn't retract them. "I have some experience with music," Regina responded simply. "And I noticed that Lucas has a special sensitivity. If you allow me, I can continue showing him some basic notes. No commitment. If it doesn't work, I'll understand. I've already called a taxi for you. Your severance pay will be deposited into your checking account." Regina nodded, resigned. Before leaving, however, she placed a small piece of paper on the hallway table. "This is my number in case you change your mind." Anthony didn't respond. He watched through the window as Regina left through the main gate and entered the taxi. Only after the vehicle disappeared around the corner did he pick up the paper and crumple it, throwing it into the nearest trash can. In the days that followed, Lucas refused to leave his room. He wouldn't accept food, wouldn't respond to stimuli, and remained sitting in a corner, rocking his body monotonously. Dr. Paula Richards, the neurologist who was following the case, came for an emergency visit. "What exactly happened, Mr. Wilson?" she asked after evaluating Lucas, who remained apathetic. Anthony recounted the incident with the housekeeper, omitting his explosive reaction. "And you said he was playing the piano?" The doctor seemed intrigued. "Not exactly playing. She was showing him some keys." "That's extraordinary. Lucas has never shown interest in musical instruments in therapy sessions." "What does this mean?" "It might mean nothing, or it might mean a great deal." The doctor adjusted her glasses. "Children with ASD frequently develop special connections with certain stimuli. Music might be one of those channels for Lucas. I strongly suggest we explore this possibility. Should I hire a music teacher?" "We could try, but..." The doctor hesitated. If he created a specific connection with this person, with the housekeeper, it might be more productive to continue with her. Trust is fundamental. Anthony felt frustration growing inside him. Rehiring Regina would be admitting his mistake, showing weakness. He, who had built an empire in the construction industry without ever going back on a decision. "I'll think about it." "Thank you, doctor." 2 weeks passed and Lucas's situation worsened considerably. He had lost weight, refused to participate in therapies, and had frequent crises. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after a crisis that lasted nearly 2 hours, Anthony found himself rummaging through the office trash can in search of that crumpled piece of paper. The number was still legible. With trembling fingers he dialed, hoping Regina wouldn't answer or that she would have changed her mind. "Hello?" The calm voice on the other end of the line made his stomach tighten. "Regina, this is Anthony Wilson." A brief silence. "Mr. Wilson, how is Lucas?" The question, so simple and direct, hit Anthony like a punch. Not, "How can I help you?" or "What do you want?" but a genuine concern for Lucas. "Not well." Anthony took a deep breath. "I need your help." Regina returned to the mansion the next day, not as a housekeeper, but as a kind of music instructor for Lucas. Anthony established clear rules. The sessions would happen 3 times a week, always in the presence of Marlene, the nurse. Regina accepted all conditions without protest. The reunion between her and Lucas was revealing. Upon seeing her enter the music room, the boy, who had spent days in an almost catatonic state, got up and walked directly to the piano. He sat on the bench and waited, staring fixedly at the keys. "He remembers," Regina commented emotionally, putting her bag on a chair. "May I?" Anthony nodded, watching from a distance as she sat beside his son. Gently, Regina placed her hands over Lucas's and guided them over the keys, producing a simple sequence of notes that formed a children's melody. To everyone's amazement, Lucas didn't withdraw his hands. On the contrary, his fingers began to move on their own, repeating exactly the sequence that Regina had just shown. "My God," Marlene whispered, looking at Anthony, who remained astonished. "He has musical memory," Regina explained with a contained smile. "It's quite common in some people with autism." The sessions continued in the following weeks. Anthony, initially reluctant, began to watch closely, fascinated by Lucas's gradual transformation. The boy, who previously spent hours isolated, now anxiously awaited Regina's visits, positioning himself by the piano well before the scheduled time. On a Friday afternoon, almost a month after Regina's return, Anthony decided to ask a question that intrigued him. "Where did you learn music?" Regina, who was organizing some sheet music, briefly raised her eyes. "I studied at the City Conservatory when I was young." "And how did you end up working as a housekeeper?" A slight blush covered Regina's cheeks. "Life doesn't always follow the path we plan, Mr. Wilson." Anthony wanted to insist, but Lucas entered the room at that moment, and the conversation was interrupted. During the session, Regina introduced a new exercise. She played a note and asked Lucas to identify it. To Anthony's surprise, the boy could name each note correctly without hesitation. "How does he know that? Did you teach him the names of the notes?" he asked, confused. Regina shook her head. "I didn't need to. Lucas has perfect pitch." "What's that?" "It's a rare ability to identify or reproduce any musical note without needing a reference." She paused. Less than 1 in 10,000 people have this ability. Anthony felt something strange in his chest, a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride for his son's extraordinary ability, sadness for not having discovered it before. How did you notice this? In the first session, I played a middle C and asked if he liked the sound. He immediately repeated C. I thought it was a coincidence, so I played other notes randomly. He named them all correctly. That revelation fundamentally changed something in Anthony. For the first time, he saw Lucas not just as a child with limitations, but as someone with extraordinary talents yet to be discovered. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Anthony's curiosity about Regina grew each day. After several successful sessions, he began to notice details that previously went unnoticed. Her elegant posture at the piano, the technical precision of her movements, the depth of her musical knowledge that went far beyond the basics. One night after Regina left, Anthony asked his personal assistant Charles to do a discreet investigation into her past. 2 days later, Charles handed him a thin folder. I didn't find much, sir. Just this. Inside was a yellowed clipping from the Boston Globe, dated 20 years earlier. The article was about young talents in American classical music, and there she was, Regina Williams, then 25, smiling shyly for the camera, seated before a grand piano. The caption read, Regina Williams, promising pianist, receives scholarship to study at the Vienna Academy of Music. Anthony was stunned. How had someone destined for an international career ended up cleaning his house? What had happened in that 20-year interval? In the next session, he couldn't hide his discovery. Why did you abandon your music career? He asked abruptly when Lucas left the room for a few minutes with Marlene. Regina froze, her fingers still on the piano keys. I see you've been investigating my past. I have the right to know who's dealing with my son. She nodded slowly, carefully closing the piano lid. It was a long time ago. I had a promising career ahead of me, it's true. I even studied in Vienna for a year, but Regina made a long pause, looking at her own hands. I had to return to the United States to care for my mother, who became seriously ill. By the time she got better, it was too late to resume my studies. The doors closed, opportunities disappeared. Life took another direction. And you never played again? A sad smile crossed Regina's lips. Play for whom, Mr. Wilson? In the years that followed, I worked 3 jobs to support my mother and pay the medical bills. The piano became a luxury I could no longer afford. The conversation was interrupted when Lucas returned to the room. Anthony observed the interaction between his son and Regina with different eyes. There was a connection there, something that transcended words. A communication through music that he, with all his money and power, had never been able to establish with his own son. As the weeks passed, Lucas made impressive progress. Not just in music, but in other aspects. He began to maintain eye contact for longer periods, to respond when called by name, to show less anxiety in situations of routine change. Dr. Paula Richards was amazed by the advances. Music therapy is working better than any conventional treatment we've tried before, she commented during a follow-up consultation. We need to permanently integrate this into his routine. Anthony agreed. He was beginning to see Regina not as an employee, but as a fundamental partner in Lucas's development. The dynamic between them subtly changed. The sessions, previously strictly professional, now sometimes ended with extended conversations about Lucas's evolution or about music in general. On a rainy July afternoon, Anthony arrived home earlier than usual and found the music room empty. Finding it strange, he followed the sound of the piano coming from the enclosed porch at the back. A glass-enclosed space where people rarely went. There were Regina and Lucas sitting side by side on the small bench, playing a simplified version of Für Elise with 4 hands. Anthony stopped at the door, not wanting to interrupt. He observed the scene with a lump in his throat. His son, usually so distant and inaccessible, now smiled as his fingers danced over the keys in perfect sync with Regina's. There was a complicity there, a shared joy that made Anthony feel for the first time in years like an intruder in his own son's life. "Very good, Lucas," Regina exclaimed when they finished, giving a high five that the boy returned, still smiling. "You're getting better and better. Soon you'll play better than me." It was then that Lucas did something that left Anthony petrified. The boy turned to Regina and briefly hugged her. It was a quick gesture, almost imperceptible, but for a child, who normally avoided any physical contact, it was monumental. Anthony silently retreated, feeling his eyes burn. He locked himself in his office and, for the first time since his wife's death 6 years earlier, allowed himself to cry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a complex emotion. Gratitude, hope, and yes, a little envy. In a few months, Regina had managed to break through barriers he had been trying to overcome for years. The next day, Anthony asked to speak with Regina after the session with Lucas. "I want to make a proposal," he said when they were alone. "I'd like you to work exclusively with us full-time. You'll be well compensated, of course, far beyond what you earn as a housekeeper in various homes. We can adapt the old music room on the second floor for your lessons with Lucas." Regina looked surprised. "That's very generous, Mr. Wilson, but please call me Anthony. It's past time for formalities between us." She nodded, a slight smile on her lips. "Anthony, then. As I was saying, it's generous, but I need to think of my mother. She still depends on me, and I have to be present." "Where do you live?" "In Dorchester. It's far from here, almost 2 hours by public transportation." Anthony reflected for a moment. "What if we also adapted a room for your mother? The house is far too big for just Lucas and me." Regina's eyes widened. "I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not charity, if that's what you're thinking." Anthony hastened to clarify. "It's a professional arrangement that benefits everyone, especially Lucas. You saw the hug yesterday, didn't you?" Regina seemed surprised that he knew. "Yes, I did. It was special. It was the first time. In 8 years, Regina, it was the first time my son hugged me spontaneously." Anthony's voice faltered slightly. "I can't let that connection be lost." After a few days of reflection, Regina accepted the proposal. Within a week, she and her mother, Mrs. Zoe, a 70-year-old woman with heart problems, moved into the E. Wilson Mansion. Anthony designated the east wing of the house for them, ensuring privacy and comfort. Regina's constant presence transformed the routine of the house. The music sessions now happened daily, at various times adapting to Lucas's natural rhythm. Gradually, other instruments were introduced, a small guitar, a recorder, even an electronic keyboard that allowed recording compositions. Yes, compositions. To everyone's amazement, Lucas not only reproduced what he heard, but began to create his own melodies. They were short and simple pieces, but with a clear structure and a particular beauty. The pure musical expression of someone who couldn't express himself with words. Anthony, previously so absent due to work, began to reorganize his schedule, to be more present at the music sessions. At first, he limited himself to observing from a distance, but Regina gradually integrated him into the process. "Why don't you try too?" she suggested once, indicating the place beside Lucas on the piano. "Bench." "Me?" Anthony laughed nervously. "I don't know anything about music." "Lucas didn't know either, remember?" Reluctantly, Anthony sat down beside his son. Regina positioned herself behind them, guiding both their hands over the keys. Together, they produced a simple melody. Lucas, surprisingly, didn't seem bothered by his father's presence beside him. "He likes it," commented Regina, observing the interaction. "Look how relaxed he is." That 3-person session marked a turning point in the relationship between father and son. Anthony, who had always seen Lucas's condition as an insurmountable obstacle, now saw possibilities where before he only saw limitations. He began studying about autism, talking with other parents in support groups, seeking complementary therapies that could be integrated with music. But life, as Regina well knew, rarely follows a linear path. 3 months after moving to the mansion, a crisis hit Wilson Enterprises. A Justice Department investigation discovered irregularities in contracts with the municipal administration signed during the previous management of the company when Anthony's father was still in charge. Anthony found himself obliged to dedicate himself entirely to the crisis, spending days in meetings with lawyers and traveling constantly to Washington to provide clarifications. For the first time in months, Lucas began showing symptoms of regression: anxiety, insomnia, refusal to participate in music sessions. Regina, sensing the situation, developed a strategy. She began leaving small musical notes for Lucas, snippets of sheet music with messages encoded in musical notes that only the boy, with his perfect pitch, could decipher. Each morning, Lucas would find a new note and spend hours at the piano, playing the sequences repeatedly until he understood the message. It was a game, a sound puzzle that kept him connected to music even during his father's prolonged absence. On one of the rare nights when Anthony managed to return home, he found Regina in the music room after the usual session hours. It was almost midnight, and the house was silent. She was alone at the piano, playing a piece he had never heard before. Something melancholy and deeply emotional that seemed to tell a story of loss and new beginnings. Anthony remained in the dimness of the hallway, listening, mesmerized. When the last note dissipated in the air, he finally entered the room. That was extraordinary. Whose composition is it? Regina jumped, not having noticed his presence. Anthony, I didn't hear you come in. I'm sorry if I startled you. It's late, I know. It's not a problem. Sometimes I come here when I can't sleep. She closed the piano lid. The piece is mine, actually, something I recently started composing. You compose? Anthony sat in a nearby armchair, suddenly aware of how much he still didn't know about her. I used to compose a lot before everything changed. I'm trying to get back to it. She hesitated before continuing. Lucas inspires me. The way he sees the world through music is pure, without the barriers that we adults create. That night, sitting in the music room illuminated only by the moonlight entering through the large windows, Anthony and Regina talked as never before. She told him about her years in Vienna, about the stroke that had almost taken her mother's life, about how she had abandoned her dreams without looking back to care for the only family she had left. I never regretted it, she said, her eyes shining in the dimness. Some choices seem like sacrifices at the moment, but later we realize they opened doors to experiences we would never have known. Like meeting Lucas, she smiled. And you. Something changed between them that night. An invisible barrier had been torn down, revealing not just the talented musician behind the housekeeper, but also the strong and compassionate woman behind the professional. The following months brought new challenges and discoveries. The crisis at Wilson Enterprises was gradually controlled, allowing Anthony to resume a more present routine. Lucas continued progressing, both in music and in aspects of everyday communication. Now, besides the piano, he showed interest in digital composition, using specialized software that Regina had introduced. It was during one of these digital composition sessions that something extraordinary happened. Lucas, concentrated on the computer screen, suddenly pointed to a sequence of notes and clearly pronounced, Regina. The room fell silent. Regina, and Anthony exchanged incredulous looks. Lucas rarely spoke, and when he did, they were just isolated words, usually repetitions of what he heard. Did you say my name, Lucas? Regina asked softly, kneeling beside him. The boy pointed to the screen again and repeated, Regina, music. They weren't just isolated words. It was an association, an intentional communication. Regina hugged the boy, unable to contain her emotion. Anthony remained paralyzed, tears flowing freely down his face. That moment of connection opened new possibilities in Lucas's treatment. Dr. Paula Richards suggested integrating speech therapy with music therapy, taking advantage of Lucas's special interest in music to develop his verbal communication. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Progress was slow but constant. Lucas began using simple words associated with music, then small phrases. His connection with Regina became increasingly deep, but contrary to what Anthony had initially feared, this didn't exclude him from the relationship. On the contrary, Regina made a point of including him in every achievement, in every new learning. On a spring afternoon, almost a year after the first encounter at the piano, an unexpected visitor arrived at the mansion. Mark Anderson, Regina's former professor at the conservatory, had come to Boston for a series of masterclasses, and having heard rumors about the work his former student was developing with an autistic child, decided to personally learn about the project. Anthony received the professor cordially, but couldn't help noticing the tension that settled in Regina. During the visit, while Lucas showed his progress at the piano, Mark observed with critical and attentive eyes, occasionally exchanging significant looks with Regina. At the end of the presentation, the professor applauded enthusiastically. Extraordinary, simply extraordinary. Regina, you always had a special gift for teaching, but what you've achieved with this young pianist is truly remarkable. Lucas did all the work. I just showed the way, she replied, modest as always. After Lucas left with Marlene for a snack, Mark turned to Regina with a serious expression. I have a proposal for you. The National Academy of Music is starting an inclusion program through art. We're looking for qualified professionals to lead the project, people with practical experience in cases like Lucas's. I'd like you to consider the position of educational coordinator. Regina turned pale. Mark, I don't know what to say. It's been so long since I left the academic circuit. Your talent never left you, Regina. What I saw today proves that. He made a significant pause. Furthermore, there's the Chicago International Piano Festival next month. I'd like you to consider participating as a special guest, playing your own composition. Anthony observed the exchange in silence, an uncomfortable sensation growing in his chest. This was an opportunity Regina deserved, the reunion with her true vocation. But what would happen to Lucas? What would happen to the delicate harmony they had built over the last year? After Mark's departure, Regina seemed disturbed. She spent the rest of the day distant, thoughtful, until Anthony finally confronted her while she was putting away sheet music in the music room. You should accept. Regina raised her eyes, surprised. What? Professor Mark's proposal. It's a unique opportunity to resume your career. She shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. It's not that simple, Anthony. I have commitments here. With Lucas, with my mother, with... She hesitated. With this house. Anthony approached, feeling an almost irresistible impulse to touch her face, but restraining himself. You sacrificed your dreams once for your mother. I won't let you do it again for us. What if it's not a sacrifice? Her eyes met his. What if it's a choice? Even so, it would be wrong. You have an extraordinary gift, Regina. The world deserves to hear you play, just as Lucas deserved to. The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Zoe, who came to call her daughter for dinner. The question remained suspended between them, unresolved but not forgotten. In the following weeks, Regina seemed divided between two worlds. She remained dedicated to the sessions with Lucas, but Anthony frequently found her at the piano late at night, working on her composition for the festival. She never mentioned having accepted the invitation, but her behavior indicated that, at least, she was seriously considering the possibility. The situation reached a critical point when, on a Sunday morning, Lucas found an unfinished score on the piano, Regina's composition for the festival. The boy spent hours trying to decipher the piece, playing it repeatedly, but always stopping at the same point where the score ended abruptly. Regina, who had gone to take Mrs. Zoe to the doctor, returned in the middle of the afternoon and found Lucas still at the piano, visibly frustrated. What is it, dear? She asked, approaching. Finish. Lucas pointed to the score. Need to finish. Regina sat beside him, eyes brimming with tears. Did you like my music? The boy nodded emphatically. Your music. Beautiful. Those simple words seemed to have a profound impact on Regina. She hugged Lucas for a long time, then wiped away her tears and promised, I'll finish it. For you. That night, after Lucas went to sleep, Regina sought out Anthony in his office. He was working on some papers, but immediately raised his eyes when she knocked on the door. May I come in? Of course. He indicated the chair in front of his desk. Any problem? Regina sat down, her hands restless in her lap. I've made a decision. I'm going to participate in the festival in Chicago, just as a guest, not as a competitor. It will be only 3 days. Anthony felt a mixture of joy and apprehension. I'm happy for you, really, but I'm not going to accept the position at the academy. She continued, holding his gaze. At least not now. Lucas still needs stability, continuity. I can't just leave him when we're making so much progress. Anthony understood, at that moment, how important Regina had become, not just for Lucas, but for himself as well. She had brought back music, yes, but also something more. The ability to see beauty in imperfection, to find strength in vulnerability. I'll do whatever is necessary to support you, Regina. You deserve to shine. In the weeks leading up to the festival, Regina spent hours at the piano, perfecting her composition. Lucas watched, fascinated, sometimes sitting beside her to play small excerpts she taught him. It was clear that the boy understood in his own way the importance of that moment for Regina. Finally, the day of departure for Chicago arrived. Regina was visibly nervous, repeatedly checking her suitcase, the documents. Lucas, noticing her agitation, approached and took her hand, leading her to the piano. They sat together, and he began to play her piece from beginning to end, including the newly completed part. "For good luck," he said simply when he finished. Regina hugged him, unable to contain her emotion. Anthony, observing the scene from the door, felt his heart tighten. In recent months, those two had built their own language, a mutual understanding that transcended words. The trip would be short, just 3 days, but for Lucas, it would be the first time Regina would be absent since they started the music sessions. Anthony promised himself he would do everything possible to maintain his son's routine, minimizing the impact of the temporary absence. On the morning of departure, Anthony drove Regina to the airport. Before saying goodbye in the departure lounge, she handed him an envelope. "For Lucas, it's a new musical note, more elaborate. It should keep him occupied until my return." Anthony accepted the envelope, suddenly aware of how close they had become in the last year. It wasn't just gratitude he felt for her, but something deeper, more complex. "Good luck, Regina. We'll be rooting for you." She smiled, that serene smile that seemed to illuminate her whole face. "Thank you for everything, Anthony, for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself anymore." The impulse was stronger than reason. Anthony leaned in and kissed her softly on the forehead. It was a simple gesture, almost paternal, but loaded with meaning. Go shine. The next 3 days were challenging. Lucas, despite the musical note and Anthony's efforts to distract him, appeared anxious about Regina's absence. He spent hours at the piano, repeatedly playing her composition, as if this could bring her back more quickly. On the night of the recital, Anthony prepared a special environment. He connected the laptop to the living room TV so they could watch the festival's live internet broadcast. Lucas sat beside his father on the sofa, unusually quiet and attentive. When Regina finally took the stage, Anthony felt his heart race. She was transformed. A midnight blue dress replaced the simple uniform or casual clothes she wore at the mansion. Her hair, usually tied in a practical bun, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. But it was her countenance that impressed him. Most, there was a serene confidence there, a presence that commanded attention. Regina sat at the piano and after a brief moment of silence began to play her composition. The first notes were melancholy, almost hesitant, evoking the sensation of being lost, of seeking a path. Gradually, the melody evolved, becoming more complex, more assertive, until culminating in a passionate movement that spoke of discovery and rebirth. Lucas followed each note with absolute attention, occasionally moving his fingers as if he were playing along. When the piece reached its climax, that section he had helped inspire, a smile lit up his face. "Regina," he murmured, pointing to the screen. "Our music." The performance was received with enthusiastic applause. The camera captured Regina rising to thank the audience, her eyes bright with emotion. In that moment, Anthony knew with certainty she had returned to where she belonged. Regina's return was marked by a warm reception. Lucas practically jumped into her arms when she came through the mansion door, unprecedented behavior for the boy. Anthony observed from a distance, happy for his son's joy, but also apprehensive about what would come next. At night, after Lucas fell asleep, Regina sought out Anthony on the porch where he was enjoying a coffee. "We need to talk," she said, sitting beside him. Anthony nodded, preparing himself for the inevitable. She would announce her decision to accept the position at the National Academy of Music, to resume her career, to move forward. Mark renewed the invitation to the academy. Regina began confirming his fears and added an offer for a national tour next semester. "You deserve it, Regina. There's no one more qualified." She looked at the coffee cup in her hands for a long moment before continuing. "The problem is that accepting would mean leaving Boston. The Academy's headquarters are in New York City, and the tour would take me to various cities for months." The silence that followed weighed with unspoken words. Finally, Anthony gathered courage to say what he knew to be true. Lucas would be devastated, but he would eventually overcome it. "I can hire other music therapists, continue the work you started." Regina raised her eyes, a determined gleam in them. "I refused." "What?" Anthony almost dropped his cup. "But why? It's the opportunity of your life." "Maybe a year ago I would have thought so." She smiled, that serene smile that so intrigued him. "But now I realize there are different types of opportunities in life. Some bring recognition, applause, professional success. Others bring connection, purpose, the chance to make a difference in someone's life." Anthony felt a lump in his throat. "I don't want you to sacrifice yourself again. You already did that, once for your mother. It's not a sacrifice when it's a conscious choice, Anthony." She put her cup on the table and turned to face him directly. "I made a counter-proposal to Mark. I suggested creating an extension program of the academy here, in Boston, specifically for children with special needs, a pilot project that could eventually be replicated in other cities. And he accepted. He's considering it," Regina shrugged. "But even if he doesn't accept, my decision is made. My place is here, at least for now. Lucas needs continuity, stability. And you? What do you need, Regina?" The question surprised them both. For a moment she seemed disconcerted, as if she had never really considered the question. "I need purpose, to feel that my music is making a difference." She paused, taking a deep breath before adding, "And I need the people who have become important to me." Her eyes met his, and something silent was communicated between them, something that went beyond words. In the following weeks, a new dynamic was established in the Wilson mansion. Mark accepted Regina's proposal, designating her as regional coordinator of the Academy's new music therapy program. With Anthony's financial and logistical support, who had seeded the ground floor of one of his commercial buildings for the project, the program began to take shape. Lucas, far from feeling abandoned by the division of Regina's attention, seemed to flourish with the new responsibilities. Regina began to include him in some sessions with other children, where he demonstrated a surprising ability to connect through music with peers who, like him, found difficulties in traditional communication. Anthony, for his part, completely reorganized his priorities. He delegated a significant part of his business responsibilities to a trusted administrative board, reserving afternoons to follow Lucas's development and evenings for Regina. Yes, because something had changed between them. What had begun as a professional relationship had transformed into friendship and gradually into something deeper. They spent hours talking after dinner, sharing stories, dreams, fears. Sometimes they would simply sit together on the porch, observing the stars in a comfortable silence. On one of these nights, when autumn was already coloring the garden trees with golden tones, Anthony finally gathered courage to express what he had been feeling for months. "Regina, I don't know exactly how to say this, so I'll just say it. You've transformed our lives, not just Lucas's, but mine too. Before you, this house was just a place where we lived. Now it's a home." Regina smiled, her eyes shining in the soft moonlight. "You've transformed my life too, Anthony. You gave me back music when I thought I had lost it forever. It's more than that." He took a deep breath, aware that he was about to change everything. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Regina didn't seem surprised, just contemplatively serene, as always. "Are you sure it's not just gratitude?" she finally asked, her voice soft in the silent night. "I began feeling gratitude." Anthony smiled. "Then admiration, respect, friendship, and then something more. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something I thought I would never feel again after losing Eliza." She nodded slowly, understanding. The depth of that confession. Anthony rarely spoke of his late wife. "I have feelings for you too, Anthony, but there are so many complicating factors. Lucas, my mother, our very different histories. I'm not proposing marriage." He gave a soft laugh. "At least not yet. I'm just opening up, being honest about what I feel. We can take it slow, discover together what this means for us." Regina extended her hand and intertwined her fingers with his. "I like that idea, of discovering together. One note at a time, as I teach Lucas." The development of the music therapy program coincided with the evolution of the relationship between Anthony and Regina. The news that they were together was received with joy by Mrs. Zoe, who had always rooted for her daughters, happiness, and with a tranquil acceptance by Lucas, who already saw them as a unit. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 1 year after the first encounter at the piano, the Wilson mansion was unrecognizable. What had once been a cold and impersonal space, decorated with expensive but soulless pieces, had transformed into a vibrant home. Music echoed through the corridors at any time of day. The sound of the piano mixed with Lucas's laughter, the animated conversations of Mrs. Zoe with Marlene, Regina's soft voice humming while preparing dinner with Anthony. To celebrate this significant anniversary and the success of the music therapy program, which now served more than 50 children, Anthony organized a benefit recital. The event would take place at the City Theatre, with the proceeds going to expand the program to other cities. Lucas, now 9 years old, would be one of the main attractions. He would play, along with Regina, an original composition they had, created together in recent weeks. The boy, who a year earlier could barely express himself verbally, now formed complete sentences, attended a regular school with specialized support, and showed extraordinary progress in his socialization. The night of the recital arrived, bringing a mix of emotions for everyone. Regina, elegant in an emerald green dress, anxiously checked if Lucas was comfortable in his small suit. The boy seemed calm, focused on the score he was mentally reviewing. Anthony observed the two from the other side of the dressing room, marveling at the journey they had traveled together. Who would have thought that that moment of fury, when he found Regina teaching Lucas at the piano against his orders, would end up transforming into the pivot of a revolution in their lives? The theatre was packed. In the front row, Mrs. Zoe smiled proudly, next to Marlene and Dr. Paula Richards, who was clinically documenting Lucas's progress for publication in a medical journal. In the following rows, families of other children, served by the program, Regina's fellow musicians, Anthony's business partners who had contributed to the project. When Regina and Lucas finally took the stage, a reverent silence fell over the theatre. Regina made a brief introduction, explaining the origin of the program and how music had opened doors that seemed permanently closed for children like Lucas. Then they sat at the piano, Regina on the left, Lucas on the right, and began to play. The piece began with simple and hesitant notes, evoking Lucas's first encounters with the piano. Gradually it became more complex, more confident, reflecting the boy's development. There were moments of tension, representing challenges and setbacks, followed by passages of rare beauty that spoke of discovery and overcoming. The audience listened in absolute silence, many with tears in their eyes. At the climax of the piece, Lucas took the lead, playing a solo that Regina had helped compose but that he had perfected in his own way, imprinting his unique personality on it. When the last note resonated through the theatre, there was a moment of stunned silence before the audience erupted in applause. Lucas, initially startled by the loud sound, soon relaxed as he felt Regina gently squeeze his shoulder. They stood up together to thank the audience, And that's when the unexpected happened. Lucas stepped forward, approaching the microphone. Regina and Anthony exchanged surprised looks. This wasn't in the program. With a clear voice, though slightly mechanical, the boy said, "This music is for my dad and for Regina. Thank you for helping me find my voice." The simplicity of those words, coming from a child who a year earlier could barely articulate his own name, touched the hearts of everyone present. Anthony, watching from the side of the stage, couldn't contain his tears. Regina briefly hugged Lucas before leading him back to the piano bench for the final acknowledgements. After the recital, when the last guest had departed and the family was returning to the mansion, Lucas surprised everyone again. As they climbed the stairs toward the bedrooms, he suddenly stopped and turned to Anthony and Regina. "Are you going to get married?" The question, so direct and unexpected, left the adults momentarily speechless. Regina was the first to recover. "Well, Lucas, we haven't talked about that yet." The boy frowned, processing the information in his literal way. "But you love each other, and you live together, and we form a family." It wasn't a question, but a logical statement. Anthony exchanged a look with Regina, a smile spreading across his face. "You're right, son. We do form a family." He hesitated, suddenly aware that they had never really discussed the subject. "What would you think if I asked Regina to marry me?" Lucas considered the question with the same seriousness with which he approached complex sheet music. "Good," he nodded emphatically. "Very good. Can I play at the wedding?" Regina laughed, her eyes meeting Anthony's with a silent question. He responded by taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in a gesture of affection. "Of course you can. Lucas, in fact, we couldn't do it without you. You brought us together after all." The next morning, as they enjoyed coffee on the sunny porch, Anthony formalized what had been implicitly decided the night before. "Regina Williams, you've transformed our house into a home. You've filled with music spaces that had been empty for years. You've shown my son a world of possibilities that I never imagined existed for him, and you've taught me that it's possible to begin again, even when we think the best of life has already passed." He removed a small box from his pocket. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Regina looked at the delicate ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, and then at Anthony's anxious face. Her gaze briefly shifted to Lucas, who was watching the scene with genuine interest, and to Mrs. Zoe, who smiled through discreet tears. "Yes," she answered simply, extending her hand for Anthony to slide the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I want to continue this symphony we've begun composing together." The wedding was celebrated 3 months later, an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. Lucas, as promised, had a prominent role, playing a piece specially composed for the occasion. Mrs. Zoe, radiant in a light blue ensemble, led her daughter down the petal-covered path to the improvised altar, where Anthony waited, more nervous than in any business meeting of his life. Mark, the former professor who had inadvertently reconnected Regina to her passion for music, came from afar for the event. He brought encouraging news. The methodology developed by Regina was being adopted as a model in similar programs in other parts of the country. The honeymoon was a cruise along the American coast, just a week, as Regina didn't want to leave Lucas or her mother for too long. But it was time enough for the couple to further solidify the bonds that united them, planning the future they would build together. Upon returning, they found a surprise prepared by Lucas with Marlene's help, a small composition he had created on his own, inspired by the stories Regina told about the coastal cities they had visited. Life followed its course, with challenges and joys. The music therapy program grew, becoming a national reference. Lucas continued progressing, overcoming limitations that previously seemed insurmountable. Anthony, without completely abandoning business, redirected a significant part of his resources to social projects, especially those aimed at children with special needs. 2 years after the wedding, the family grew with the arrival of Sophie, a 7-year-old girl with Down syndrome, whom they adopted after meeting her in the music therapy program. The adaptation wasn't easy. Lucas, accustomed to being an only child, needed time to accept the idea of sharing his parents' attention, but music, as always, served as a bridge. Sophie had a sweet voice and loved to sing, perfectly complementing her brother's talent at the piano. One night, as they watched the children playing together in the music room, Regina rested her head on Anthony's shoulder and whispered, "Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if you hadn't come home." Early that afternoon, and found me teaching Lucas at the piano. Anthony smiled, hugging her tighter. I would probably still be that bitter, lonely man, obsessed with control and results, and Lucas would be trapped in his silent world, his talent dormant. And I would still be cleaning houses, dreaming of a piano I couldn't play. There was gratitude in their voices, but no regret. The path they had traveled, with all its obstacles and unexpected detours, had led them exactly where they were meant to be. "I know what impresses me most," Anthony commented, watching Lucas help Sophie find the right notes. "How something seemingly negative can transform into the best thing that ever happened to us. I was furious when I found you with Lucas at the piano. I thought you were violating my trust, crossing boundaries." "And I was," Regina laughed softly. "Technically, I shouldn't have been in the music room. Sometimes we need someone to cross our boundaries." He kissed her forehead affectionately, "to show us that these boundaries exist only in our minds." The music that Lucas and Sophie were creating together filled the house, overflowing into the garden through the open windows. It was a simple but deeply touching melody, like the very life they had built, imperfect at times, out of tune at others, but always authentic and truly their own. On the 5th anniversary of the first encounter at the piano, Anthony organized a special celebration. He invited everyone involved in the extraordinary journey they had traveled: Dr. Paula Richards, Mark, the teachers and students of the music therapy program, friends who had supported each step of the way. During the event, held in the newly inaugurated auditorium of the Wilson Foundation for Inclusive Arts, a project that Regina directed with passion, Anthony gave an emotional speech. "5 years ago, I was a man who measured success by the numbers in his bank account and the contracts signed. I believed I knew everything about my son, when in fact I knew almost nothing. It took a housekeeper with a pianist's hands to show me how much I was missing behind the barriers I had built myself." He paused, seeking Regina's gaze in the front row. "Today, I measure success in different ways. By the gleam in Lucas's eyes, when he masters a difficult sonata, by Sophie's voice intoning a song she composed herself, by the courage of children who find in music a channel to express what words cannot capture, and especially by the privilege of sharing my life with a woman who taught me that the most beautiful notes frequently emerge after the deepest silences." The celebration culminated with a joint performance, a group formed by children and young people from the program, led by Lucas at the piano and Sophie at the microphone. They performed a musical suite created collectively, each movement representing a different part of the journey they had shared. In the audience, Anthony firmly held Regina's hand, occasionally bringing it to his lips in a gesture of reverence and gratitude. On Regina's other side, Mrs. Zoe, now with her health recovered thanks to medical care she previously couldn't afford, smiled proudly. Watching his son on stage, focused on the piano keys, but occasionally raising his eyes to exchange a complicit smile with his adoptive sister, Anthony reflected on the surprising turns of life. How could he have imagined that his greatest fury would transform into the catalyst for his greatest happiness? That the woman he had almost impulsively fired would become the center of his world? That the son he considered hopelessly trapped in his own universe would be able to touch the hearts of so many people? In that moment of crystalline clarity, Anthony understood the most valuable lesson Regina had taught him: that life, like music, is not about achieving technical perfection, but about finding beauty even in dissonance, meaning in silences, and especially allowing each note, each measure, each movement to transform us profoundly. When the last chords of the performance dissipated in the air and the audience burst into applause, Lucas rose from the piano bench and walked to the microphone that Sophie offered him. With a clear and confident voice that few could have imagined 5 years earlier, he said the words that perfectly summarized the extraordinary journey they had traveled. "Music gave me a voice when I had no words. My family gave me love when I didn't know how to return it. Together we created a harmony that no one can silence. Regina and Anthony went up on stage to embrace their children, forming an unlikely but perfectly tuned quartet. As the curtains closed on the family, the standing audience applauded not just a musical performance, but the living story of transformation and hope they represented. In his office in the mansion, now transformed into a family space where everyone could freely enter, Anthony kept framed the crumpled sheet of music that Regina had left on the piano before departing for her first festival. Beside it, a photograph of the moment when Lucas spoke his first words at the microphone, and more recently, a drawing made by Sophie representing her family. 4 figures holding hands surrounded by colorful musical notes. The mansion that had once been silent and cold now overflowed with sounds. Lucas's piano, Sophie's voice, the melodies Regina created in her spare time, the guitar that Anthony had learned to play, with considerable difficulty, to accompany the family's musical talents. Even Mrs. Zoe contributed with her sung stories from the Northeast that enchanted the children before bedtime. Music, which had entered that house almost by accident, or by destiny as Regina preferred to think, had become not just a therapy or a pastime, but the very language through which they communicated, grew, and loved each other. A universal language that surpassed limitations, tore down barriers, and built bridges where before there were only abysses of silence and incomprehension. And so, note after note, day after day, the Wilson family continued composing their unique symphony, an unfinished work always evolving but already undeniably beautiful in its authenticity. The end. Dear listener, if this story touched your heart, perhaps you know someone special who would also be transformed by it. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. Has the piano in your life also brought transformation? We are here to hear your own melody of overcoming.